Greetings everyone, my name is Rejnols, and today we are talking about whether or not points are enough to fix Custodes. The reason why I'm making this video is because I see a lot of comments on the Discord server, link in the description below by the way, as well as other Discord servers, Reddit, just all over the place talking about how Custodes cannot be fixed by getting those extra points that we might be getting in the data slate if they decide to revert the point changes from the previous data slate. The reason for this is that people are saying that 150 points more will not make their list better, they cannot afford another unit of actual Custodes, stuff like that. However, I humbly disagree in that sentiment, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So first and foremost, why do I think point changes might be enough? Well, the current issues we are facing when building a Custodes list is that most units need a character to be fully efficient. Yes, you could in theory run 4-man guard squads or a 4-man warden squad. However, if those units are not joined by characters, they don't really get their full benefit or get to their full potential. For guards, if they don't have, say, a blade champion in them, they have a bit of a hard time reaching the opponent because they move 6 inches, they don't have any auto advancing, they cannot advance and charge by themselves. But the Blade Champion allows them to not only advance and charge once per game, but also reroll the advance and reroll the charge, making them a lot more consistent and just a lot faster. For Wardens, obviously, if you don't have a character join them, then they don't get the -1 to wound if the enemy's strength is higher than their toughness. Because so many characters went up in points, actually every character except for Valerian and the Sister of Silence characters went up by 20 points, that means that most characters are the same cost as half of a unit. Now, this leads to the issue of not really being able to afford more units of Custodes and put a character in them because they become so expensive. A Custodian Guard squad with a Blade Champion is 370 points. A Warden squad with a Shield Captain is 415 points. So it really limits how many blocks of Custodes you can take. And that is one of the current issues we're facing right now. However, there are some units that don't need characters. For example, the units that do need characters, in my opinion anyway, are Guards, Wardens, Alaris, and Virtus Praetor. Now I know the Virtus Praetor isn't the greatest example because they're just really expensive and not that great overall. But when a character joins them, specifically the Shield Captain, they actually get a lot of really good abilities. It's just that they're too expensive to use. The units that don't need characters are Venatari, because there's no characters to join them, and they get the full benefit without having any characters attached to them. They can rapid ingress for free, they can fall back, shoot and charge, they move fast, they can do their job without any characters attached to them. Caladius Graph tanks are obviously, tanks, they don't need a character. And then there's also the minimum sized Alaris units, 2-man squads of Alaris. You don't really want to put a character in them because their job is not necessarily the same as a 5-man Alaris squad. A 2-man Alaris squad is a bit more flexible. Yes, they still have some killing power, but you're okay with using them a little bit more flexible. So of the viable units in the Custodes roster right now, 4 of them need a character to perform at a good level. And then 2.5, because MSU Alaris does not need a character. And right now, it is totally possible to make an army with just these units at 2,000 points and then have, a decent amount of Custodes. The issue with that, however, is that those units are way too expensive to leave behind to just hold an objective or do secondaries and then do nothing else for that turn. For secondaries, stuff like Area Denial, if you put a big blob of Custodes in the middle turn 1, they're gonna get shot to pieces. A Warden squad has an okay chance of surviving, but you're still trading, 5 victory points for a 400 point unit, a fifth of your army potentially gone just to get 5 victory points. And you don't really want to do that turn 1. Turn 3, that might be fine because your opponent has lost some units and cannot maybe reliably kill them. But turn 1, if all you're doing is throwing that 1 unit in the middle and your opponent can just focus fire everything into it, then that's not a really good trade. Deploy Teleport Homer, kind of the same situation. Unless you can hide behind a ruin and do the action, then you don't really want to put a 400 point unit in the middle just to get shot at. Behind enemy lines is just pretty hard to score while also, attacking your opponent. If you're trying to be in your opponent's deployment zone, that usually means you're exposed in some way or another in the following turn. So if you don't also, say, charge something and kill it and score behind enemy lines, Once again, feels really bad to put a 400 point unit in that situation. Investigate signals obviously means you have to be in the corners, and if you're in the corners with a 400 point unit, that unit's gonna need maybe 2 or even 3 turns to get anywhere else. And there's also just the issue of, let's say you draw this turn 1, right? Turn 1 and you're playing the search and destroy deployment. There's a chance you can't even reach the corners because you've deployed in a way where you just can't do it because there's not enough space and you cannot move fast enough to get there. And that is why we need secondary units, such as assassins, witch seekers, and prosecutors, to do that for us. Those units are cheap enough that if they do that one thing and then die, we're fine with it. Alternatively, if we put them in a spot where the opponent, needs to put some firepower into them, at least that's not going into our actual Custodes unit. But including these units also takes up a chunk of points for our list building, taking us back to the very start where, yes, you could maybe build an army of 4 to 6 blocks of Custodes, but then you have nothing to play the points game, right? Nothing you can leave behind to hold your deployment zone objective. Nothing you can throw away to score, say, area denial or deploy teleport homers. And that means that every single model or unit you lose needs to make the choice of scoring points or not scoring those points and then potentially losing because, well, you're not scoring points. So now it's time for a little bit of an exercise, and after I've told you this, we're going into Battlescribe and I'll describe why I think some of these point changes will be enough. But first and foremost, I want you to right now build a list for Custodes where you don't include any secondary units. Now I call them secondary units, that doesn't mean they just score secondaries. I'm just calling them secondary as in, they're not the main Custodes units. And I want you to go into Battlescribe or the app or whatever else you're using to build your lists. And I want you to build your favorite archetype. So that could be a Terminator heavy list, tons of Terminators, perhaps some Venatari to have that I'm gonna go all in turn 2 with all my teleporting and rapid ingressing and all that stuff. It could also be a full-on basic infantry list with wardens and guards. Or it could be an all-rounder list where you have some wardens, you have some Terminators, you have some tanks, that kind of situation. So yeah, I want you to go ahead and build that list. Do not put any prosecutors, witch seekers, or assassins in the list. And you don't have to make it 2,000 points, right? Build it to a point where you're yeah, I've included everything I'd like to include. And then see how many points you have left. So go ahead, pause the video for 5 minutes, build that list, and then come back. Alright, welcome back. You've hopefully built your list. We are now going to talk about why the point changes might actually be enough. I have a few examples of lists we can look at. Let's start off by talking about that Terminator example, right? So here I've built a list that is focused on just Terminators and Venatari. Very simple, we have a shield captain in Terminator armor, a 5-man squad for him to join, and then 2 6-man squads of Valaris without a character, and 2 3-man squads of Venatari. The reason why the shield captain is joining the 5-man squad is for coherency things. In 10th edition, coherency starts at 7 models, so if you have more than 7 models, every single model needs to be within range of 2 other models to stay in coherency. So just to avoid that, we're making a 5-man squad for the captain to join, and then we have 2 6-man squads on their own. Alright, so the list as is right now with the current points before the data slate, we are at 1,730 points. That means we have 270 points left over. However, if we assume that the point changes are being reverted on everything, that would mean that we're saving 20 points on the shield captain, 25 points on the 5-man squad, and 30 points on each of the 6-man squads. So that would be a total of 105 points. So in actuality, the list we can build right now should be at 2,105 points rather than 2,000 points. So let's try and do that. Now for me, I have my, let's call it go-to secondary units. And that package consists of 1 unit of prosecutors, 2 units of witch seekers, the Custodes assassin, and the Evasor assassin. And you can see that with all of those things included, we are at 2,035 points. However, as we just discussed, this list, assuming the points are changing, should be at 2,105 points. So we actually still have 70 points left to work with. What can those 70 points get us? Well, we could go ahead and grab Ceaseless Hunter on our Terminator and get another Prosecutor squad. So that means that in total we have 3 blocks of Terminators, one of them with a captain, We have 2 units of prosecutors. One we can leave at the home objective to hold it. The other one can be in reserve, so we can do some secondary actions with them. We can also deploy them on the line in case we go first to grab the middle objective and do, say, deploy teleport homers. The same goes for the Witch Seekers. They can start on the line, do a scout move, grab a no man's land objective for cleanse or secure no man's land. The Assassins can be in the corner for investigate signals or any other things. And then we have the Venatari in Deep Strike to rapid ingress and be a threat later on in the game. Now, I'm not saying that this is the perfect list, or this will be the meta list. I'm just trying to give you an example of what those 105 points more can give you and how that can help you build a list. You get 5 custodian units, right? 5 really good custodian units, 3 Terminator units, 2 Venatari units, and then on top of that, you get 6 secondary units to score points, hold primary, and generally do things you don't want to do with the big Custodes units. This list, if I were to play it today, would not be able to have, say, 1 Witch Seeker squad, 1 Prosecutor squad, and Ceaseless Hunter. So I would lose out on 2 units and an enhancement if I were to play this list today. So you can see the difference 105 points actually do in list building. Yes, your 2000 point list right this moment will not be able to afford another block of custodians. However, it changes the way you can build the list from the ground up. And I think that's where people are going wrong. Right now they're looking at their current list and going, well, I can't even afford anything special even if I get 150 points. But I think that's wrong. That's the wrong way to look about it. It's not about adding more Custodes to the list. It's about adding a character, an enhancement, more secondary units, etc., etc. So that was the example for a Terminator list. Let's now move on and go into the infantry example here. So this is like a heavy infantry, basic infantry list that I just came up with really quick. Again, I'm not saying this is going to be meta. These are purely for examples. The list consists of Trajan, 2 Blade Champions, and a Shield Captain. So 4 characters, something that is very rare to see at the moment because characters are so damn expensive. We have 3 units of Custodian Guards and 2 units of Custodian Wardens. So Trajan and the Shield Captain, let's have them join the Wardens, and then have 2 Blade Champions join 2 of the Guard Squads. That leaves 1 Guard Squad without any characters. So you could, in theory, spend those 250 points on something else if you wanted to. You could take a Venatari squad if you wanted to. This was just, again, an example. So, this list today, as points are right now, leaves us with 160 points. However, once again, let's assume that those point changes are coming. That means on the characters alone, we'll save 80 points, because they all went up by 20 points each. So that's 80 points here. Then it's 25 points for each guard squad, so that's 75 points. We're now at 155 points. And then an additional 50 points for the Custodian Wardens. That's 205 points. So in actuality, the list we can build is 2,205 points. Once again, I'm just gonna go ahead and add my normal package of 1 Prosecutor unit, 2 Witch Seeker units, the Custodes Assassin, and the Eversor Assassin. Even after adding all of that, we still have 60 points left over. So we go ahead and say, you know what, let's give this guy a Veiled Blade, let's give this guy Ceaseless Hunter, and that's one way of doing it. You could also say, I don't want Ceaseless Hunter, I'd rather have, Inspirational Exemplar. You could also say, you know what, I don't want any of these enhancements, I have 60 points left over, I'd like to get another unit of Witch Seekers. You could also, remove the Prosecutor unit and take, say, a Rhino. And with the Rhino, we still have 30 points left over, and now we can go ahead and grab that Ceaseless Hunter enhancement, so on and so forth. You could also decide that you'd like a character for that last unit of Custodian Guards, and maybe you really like the Kyria Draxus indirect firing, so you go ahead and find Kyria Draxus. I don't even know. There she is, 75 points. And we still have 100 points left over after that. You could also decide that you don't want the 3rd Custodian Guard Squad, you don't want Kyria Draxus, and instead you'd like, 1 unit of Venatari. Or hell, 2 units of Venatari, because as we said, we could build a list for 2,205 points. Look at how much stuff extra you can get, assuming these point changes go through. No, you're not gonna get a full block of Custodes in your current list. But you can get here, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units of Custodes, and then 2 units of Witch Seekers and a Custodes Assassin, and you still have 30 points left over, so you can grab that enhancement. Or, again, there's just so many options. You could say, you know what, I don't want the Shield Captain. I'd rather take something else. And then you could probably save some points there. And then for our final example, we have this all-rounder list. I already added some units here. Let me just remove them real quick so I can talk you through it. We have this all-rounder list, right? We have a Trajan Valoris, a Blade Champion, and a Shield Captain in Alaris Terminator armor, a 5-man Alaris squad, 2 Custodian Warden squads, and 2 Graph tanks. Currently, list as is, we have 250 points left. Once again, assuming points changes, characters will give us 60 points, and our infantry will give us 75 points. So we can build a list that is 2,135 points. Once again, my normal package of a Prosecutor, double Witch Seekers, Calidus Assassin, and the Eversor Assassin, and we still have 80 points left over. Well, 80 points, what does that give us? Once again, we can choose to grab some enhancements for our characters. We could also add another Prosecutor unit. We could also add a Rhino for the Prosecutors. And I hope with these 3 examples, I've made my point clear. The point changes could very well be enough to give Custodes the push they need. Now, I'm not gonna pretend that devastating wounds isn't an issue, but remember, that's not just an issue for Custodes, that's basically a game-wide issue. But where Custodes are lacking the most, in my opinion, is that a misstep, such as positioning your Custodes in the wrong place, or deciding to go into the middle, for example, to score some points, is currently too costly. Currently, if you lose that 1 unit of Wardens or 1 unit of Custodian Guards, without them, taking something down, that is just a loss that is too big to handle. What those potentially 150 to 200 points we're getting in the data slate helps us with is we get a lot more secondary units we can throw away for those things. Instead of having to consider, is it worth it to put my Wardens in the middle turn 1 to score 5 points on area denial, we can just say, is it worth it to throw away my Witch Seeker squads for 5 victory points? Yeah, I think it is. Because look at it this way, instead of having to decide whether or not 400 points of Custodes is going to be okay to throw away, you now instead just have to consider, is 50 points okay to throw away? The answer there, by the way, is yes. In like 9 out of 10 scenarios. Obviously, there are always some scenario where the Witch Seekers could have done something else. It doesn't really matter. But that is the end of the video, and I hope I've taught you a little bit about why those point changes will matter a lot. Now, there is a bit of a chance that this will be the last piece of content that I'm throwing out before I'm heading home for Christmas. If that is the case, then thank you so much for a great year. The channel has grown amazingly. I've gotten so many kind comments from so many of you. And I'm just really happy I can produce something that people find value in. And I just hope you'll all continue watching and continue, interacting and talking about Custodes, Warhammer, all those things. So whether you celebrate Christmas or something else, happy holidays. And until I see you again, I hope you have a wonderful time.